They thought they could steal my comfort and humiliate me before the whole family, but the look on their faces when the police showed up, worth every mile of the journey. Hi, I'm Lorraine Parker. I'm 68 years old, retired after 38 years of teaching, and this story, well, let's just say, I never imagined my trip to my niece's wedding would start with fraud charges. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? I love hearing where my stories travel. I'd been counting down the days to this trip for months. Santorini, my niece Lila was getting married there, in a cliffside chapel surrounded by endless blue sea and whitewashed stone. It would be the first time in years that the whole family gathered somewhere beautiful for something joyful. My husband had been gone nearly a decade, and though I'd found my own ways to fill the quiet, weddings still brought a lump to my throat. This trip wasn't just about the ceremony. It was about proving to myself that I could still travel, still treat myself, still live with the kind of grace and style my late husband always encouraged me to. That's why, when I booked my flight months ago, I decided to splurge on a business class upgrade, not just for the luxury my lower back had been giving me trouble for years, and a cramped 10-hour flight could leave me in pain for days. The extra space, the reclining seat, and the chance to arrive fresh enough to celebrate Lila's big day, it was worth every cent. I'd been careful with my spending in retirement, but this was special. I printed out the email confirmation the day I booked it, double-checked my seat selection, 4A, a window seat with a view of the wing and plenty of space to stretch. That seat wasn't just a convenience, it was a promise to myself. I wasn't traveling alone. My son, Eric, and his wife, Tessa, were on the same flight. Tessa, well, I'll be honest, she and I had never truly warmed to each other. There was always this polite tension, like we were two people dancing to different songs at the same party. She liked control over plans, over conversations, over how things were done. I'd learned to step back to keep the peace, even when she made little digs about my old-fashioned ways, or rolled her eyes when I asked questions. Still, it was Lila's wedding. I told myself that for 1 week I could ignore the little frictions and focus on the joy. The morning of the flight, I arrived at the airport early. I'm old school that way. I wanted time to check in without rushing, maybe grab a coffee before boarding. I wore my soft navy travel cardigan, the one with deep pockets for my passport and boarding pass, and my comfortable flats. My carry-on was neatly packed with essentials, a small gift for Lila wrapped in ivory paper, my reading glasses, a book of poetry, and a silk scarf my husband had once bought me in Paris. When Eric and Tessa arrived, Tessa immediately took the lead at the check-in kiosk. "Don't worry, Lorraine, I'll handle this," she said, punching in our booking reference with a speed that suggested she'd been rehearsing it. I tried to step forward to hand over my passport, but she waved me off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed her glancing at the screen longer than necessary, her nails tapping against the counter. Something about the way she shifted her body to block my view pricked at me, but I brushed it away. "It's fine, Lorraine," I told myself. "She's just being efficient." We printed the boarding passes, and Tessa handed mine to me without making eye contact. I tucked it into my pocket without looking. Why would I? I knew where I was sitting. As we made our way through security, Tessa chattered about the wedding schedule, the welcome dinner, the sunset cruise, the rehearsal brunch. I nodded along, but my mind was already halfway to Santorini, picturing the moment Lila walked down the aisle. In the gate area, I found a seat by the window and watched the planes taxi and lift into the overcast morning sky. I thought about Lila as a little girl, running barefoot through the grass at family picnics, her hair always escaping its braid. She'd grown into such a poised, kind young woman, the kind of person who deserved every bit of beauty on her wedding day. I couldn't wait to see her in her dress, to hug her and tell her how proud I was. The boarding announcement crackled over the loudspeaker, calling business class passengers first. I reached into my pocket for my boarding pass, ready to step into line. And that's where the trip I'd been dreaming of for months began to unravel. I didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, I'd be staring at my seat 4A already occupied by someone who knew exactly what they were taking from me. And worse, they'd be smiling. The boarding line for business class was shorter than I expected, just a handful of travelers ahead of me. I stepped forward, ready to hand over my passport and boarding pass, when Tessa's hand landed lightly but firmly on my arm. "Oh, we're boarding together, Lorraine," she said with a breezy smile. "We've got a few minutes. Let's just wait until Eric finishes in the restroom." I glanced toward the men's room. Eric was nowhere in sight. "I can go ahead," I said gently. "I'll see you on the plane." But she tilted her head, as if I'd suggested something unreasonable. No, it's fine. We'll just board as a group. It'll make it easier to coordinate with our luggage." Her tone was light, but something in her eyes, a flicker of calculation, made me hesitate. Tessa was good at masking things, at making her will sound like a favor to you. Still, I shrugged and stepped back, tucking my boarding pass into my cardigan pocket. Passengers began walking down the jet bridge, their carry-ons trailing behind them like obedient pets. The flight attendants at the gate scanned passes and smiled, their polished voices welcoming each traveler aboard. I watched the numbers on the overhead display tick down as the business class boarding wrapped up, wondering why we were still standing here. Eric returned a moment later, phone in hand, barely looking up as Tessa gestured for us to head forward. She walked quickly, slipping ahead of me as if afraid she'd lose her place in line. I let her go. I've never been one to push, but something about the urgency in her steps made my pulse quicken. We reached the gate agent together. Tessa went first, scanning her boarding pass with a confident flick of her wrist. "Enjoy your flight," the agent said, and Tessa stepped onto the jet bridge without looking back. Eric followed, doing the same. Then it was my turn. The gate agent scanned my pass and frowned. Just a moment, ma'am." She tapped at her screen, eyes narrowing. "Your seat is 38C? My stomach gave a strange lurch. "No, it should be 4A business class. I paid for the upgrade months ago." The agent glanced at me, then back at her screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your boarding pass says 38C economy." It was a moment I'd later replay in my mind over and over, the way the agent's polite, slightly puzzled tone contrasted with the roar of disbelief in my head. I reached into my bag for the printed confirmation, but before I could speak, a burst of laughter carried back from the jet bridge. I looked up in time to see Tessa, my seat's location visible in bold on her pass as she shifted it in her hand, turning to say something to Eric. She stepped just out of sight, but I caught the faint glimmer of a champagne flute through the open door of the plane. My seat. My champagne. "Is there some kind of mistake?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. The agent's fingers tapped over the keys again. "It looks like the seat was reassigned earlier today. I can have someone check on it if you'd like, but boarding is nearly complete." I stood there, the overhead screen announcing final call for business class passengers, my grip tightening on the paper boarding pass until the edges curled under my fingers. My heart wasn't just pounding from anger, it was the sting of realization. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. The agent's eyes softened, as if she could see the hurt flashing across my face. "Do you want to take your economy seat so we can depart on time, and we can follow up afterward?" I drew in a breath, steady and deliberate. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'd like you to check on it now." She nodded, picking up her phone to call someone on board. Behind me, a couple of passengers shuffled impatiently, their carry-ons bumping against their legs. I stepped aside to let them pass, my mind spinning. Tessa had handled the booking kiosk that morning. She'd blocked my view of the screen. She'd insisted we board together. No, she'd stalled me until she and Eric could get through first. I could almost hear her voice from months past, when I'd once mentioned treating myself. "Oh, Lorraine, you don't need all that. You're fine in the back." No, not this time. I didn't know exactly how she'd done it, but I knew one thing: she'd taken what was mine, and she was counting on me to sigh, accept it, and let it go. But I've been underestimated before, and I've learned there's nothing more dangerous than someone who's been patient for too long. I watched the gate agent speaking quietly into the phone, my pulse steadying. I wasn't going to make a scene, not yet. But the game had already shifted in my mind. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about dignity. The gate agent hung up the phone and offered me a polite but apologetic smile. "They've confirmed your original seat, 4A, is now occupied. The passenger is listed under a different name, but the booking was changed under your reservation code." Her voice was steady, but the words landed like a slap. Changed. Under my reservation. That meant whoever was in my seat hadn't just lucked into it. They'd taken it with the exact details only someone close to me could have known. "I'd like to know who authorized that," I said, keeping my tone measured. The agent hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly to the jet bridge before leaning closer. "Ma'am, I can't give out another passenger's information, but I can tell you that the change was made at the kiosk this morning." The kiosk. My mind replayed the moment Tessa blocking my view with her perfectly coiffed hair, tapping at the screen like she owned it. My gut tightened. "I understand," I told the agent, though my voice was heavier now, steel beneath the softness. "Would you like me to escort you to your current seat so we can depart?" she asked, gesturing toward the economy line. I almost laughed. Go quietly. Shuffle to the back like a problem to be moved aside. "No, not yet. I'll board," I said, "but I'd like to take a look at business class first." She hesitated again, then handed back my boarding pass. Of course. I walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the air conditioning loud in my ears. The smell of jet fuel hung faintly in the air, and with every step, my heartbeat synced to the hollow echo of my flats on the metal walkway. I wasn't even in the cabin yet, but I already knew what I was about to see. The curtain separating business from economy was still open when I stepped through the door. My eyes went immediately to 4A. There she was. Tessa sat angled toward the aisle, her hair perfectly smooth, a flute of champagne in her hand. Her pale cashmere wrap was draped artfully over her knees, the way influencers posed for airport selfies. Eric sat beside her in 4B, already flipping through the in-flight menu. As if sensing my gaze, she turned and smiled. Not the warm smile you give family, but a small, tight-lipped curve that said, "You can't do anything about it." "Lorraine!" she said brightly, as though we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store. "Oh, they must have put you in economy. I told them you wouldn't mind. You'll be more comfortable with people your own age back there." A flush rose up my neck, but I kept my voice even. "That was my seat, Tessa." She tilted her head, all false innocence. "Oh, was it? There must have been a mix-up. Anyway, we'll see you after the flight." And then she turned back to Eric, dismissing me like I was an interruption to her holiday. I stood there for a moment, gripping my carry-on so tightly my knuckles ached. Around me, other business-class passengers glanced up from their champagne and magazines, their eyes darting between me and the woman in my seat. A flight attendant approached with a professional smile. "Can I help you find your seat, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, still looking at Tessa. "I think you can." But I didn't press further. Not there. Not yet. I knew what a scene would look like, And I knew that's what she'd expect, an emotional outburst she could later twist into, "Lorraine made a fool of herself on the plane." No, this was going to end differently. As I walked toward economy, I caught a fragment of Tessa's voice behind me. "She really doesn't understand these things," followed but a tinkling laugh. That was the moment my decision crystallized. She thought she'd gotten away with it. But I'd spent a lifetime teaching children that every action had consequences. Tessa was about to learn that lesson in front of an audience she'd never forget. The walk to row 38 felt longer than it should have. Each step down the narrow aisle was accompanied by the rustle of coats, the thump of overhead bins closing, and the occasional sidelong glance from strangers who'd caught the exchange up front. My seat was a middle one, wedged between a young man in headphones and a grandmother with a toddler on her lap. I slid into it without a word, the stiff economy class cushion pressing into my back in all the wrong places. My carry-on barely fit under the seat in front of me. This was supposed to have been a seat with legroom, with space for my knees and my aching spine, with the hum of the engine softened by distance. Instead, I was sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers, my knees grazing the hard plastic of the tray table. The humiliation simmered under my skin, but my face stayed neutral. I've learned over the years that the most dangerous response to arrogance is not outrage, it's composure. People like Tessa expect you to explode, to give them the performance they can retell later. What they can't handle is quiet calculation. I slid my hand into my cardigan pocket and felt the crisp edge of my printed upgrade confirmation. Still there. Still proof. I pulled out my phone and, shielding the screen from my seatmates, opened the airline's app. My booking still showed the original seat assignment. Crossed out. Replaced with the economy code. No explanation. Just gone. I took a steadying breath and opened the airline's customer service line. A polite, automated voice thanked me for calling and warned of extended wait times. I put in my frequent flyer number. It didn't take long. Within 3 minutes, a live agent picked up. "This is Alan from the airline fraud department. How may I assist you today?" "Hello, Alan," I said evenly. "My name is Lorraine Parker. I paid for a business class upgrade seat 4A on flight 726 to Athens. When I boarded, I found someone else sitting in my seat. The booking change was unauthorized, and I'd like to report it as fraud." Alan's tone shifted almost imperceptibly, growing sharper, more alert. "Do you have proof of purchase for the upgrade?" "Yes," I said, sliding the printed confirmation onto my lap. "I have the email confirmation, the charge on my card, and my original boarding pass showing 4A before it was reprinted this morning." "Who handled your check-in?" I kept my answer simple. "A family member traveling with me. I suspect they used my reservation code to change the seat to themselves." He paused, the faint click of keys in the background. "I see the seat change was made at 8:42 a.m. at the kiosk in Terminal C, the same time your check-in occurred. This was absolutely unauthorized. Please stay on the line, Miss Parker. I'll need to coordinate with our ground security team and the airport police." I leaned back, my lips pressing into a thin line. The young man next to me was scrolling on his phone, oblivious. The grandmother to my right was cooing softly to the toddler. It was an oddly calm pocket of the plane, and I was glad for it. My revenge would be precise. No raised voices, no angry theatrics. Just the truth, delivered with official weight. Alan came back on the line. "Ma'am, please remain seated until instructed. Security will meet you at the gate before departure to resolve this. Do not confront the other passenger directly." "Understood," I said. I ended the call and slid my phone back into my pocket. Out of habit, I glanced toward the front of the plane. Through the narrow slit in the drawn curtain, I could see the glow of business class lighting, the glint of a glass in someone's hand. I imagined Tessa leaning back in my seat, confident she'd won her voice, dripping with false sweetness later when she'd say, "Oh, Lorraine, you should have just relaxed. It's only a seat." But it wasn't only a seat, it was the principle. It was the knowledge that she'd decided, without hesitation, that her comfort mattered more than mine, that she could take what I'd earned and I'd simply accept it. Not this time. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Outside the window, the tarmac was wet with morning rain, reflecting the blue and red lights of service vehicles. Passengers were still boarding, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering at the gate. I knew, in just a few minutes, that curtain up front would part, and when it did, Tessa's world and her smug little smile would change completely. The intercom overhead crackled with the usual pre-boarding chatter, last calls for passengers, reminders to stow carry-ons, but then I noticed a slight change in tone from the gate agent's voice. It wasn't the cheerful efficiency from earlier, it was lower, more clipped. I kept my eyes forward, but my ears tuned in. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be pausing boarding momentarily for a security matter. Please remain seated." There it was. A few rows ahead, someone muttered, "What's going on?" A businessman across the aisle glanced toward the front, his phone angled slightly as though ready to film if something happened. I sat still, my hands resting on the printed confirmation in my lap, my heart beating steady and calm. It didn't take long. The curtain at the front parted, and two uniformed airport police officers stepped into the cabin. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other lean with quick eyes that scanned the rows like a spotlight. Behind them, the head gate agent followed, holding a tablet. They moved with a quiet authority, no rush, no raised voices. But every step told the passengers this wasn't a small matter. They stopped at 4A. "Ma'am," the taller officer began, "we need to verify your ticket and identification, please." Eric shifted in his seat beside her. "Is there a problem?" The gate agent's voice was polite, but her words carried just enough volume for nearby passengers and me to hear. "We have a report that this seat was fraudulently reassigned from another paying passenger's booking. The change occurred without authorization this morning. I saw it then, the faint flicker in Tessa's expression. The moment she realized this wasn't going to be brushed off with a laugh. "I think you've made a mistake," she said smoothly, handing over her boarding pass. "This was printed at the kiosk. We're all family here." "Yes," the lean officer replied evenly, "and that's part of the issue." The businessman across from them had already angled his phone toward the aisle. In economy, a murmur rippled down the rows. I heard the words "fraud" and "stolen seat" drift back to me. The taller officer continued, "Ma'am, please collect your belongings. We'll need to speak with you and your travel companion off the aircraft." Eric's voice rose a notch. "Is this really necessary? We're going to a wedding." The officer didn't waver. "Sir, we need you to step off the plane now." The sound of the overhead bin clicking open was oddly loud in the stillness. A flight attendant reached up to retrieve their carry-ons, placing them in the officer's hands. Tessa glanced over her shoulder then, and for the first time since this morning, her eyes met mine. No smile now, just a thin, tight line of disbelief and something else. Fear. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Passengers leaned toward the aisle as the officers led them forward, Eric muttering under his breath, Tessa keeping her gaze low. The businessman's phone tracked them the entire way. The moment they stepped off, the gate agent turned toward the rear of the cabin. "Miss Lorraine Parker?" I stood, smoothing the front of my cardigan. "Yes." She gestured toward the front. "Your seat has been restored. Let me help you with your bag." As I walked past the curious faces, I caught snippets. That was her seat. She handled it so well. Imagine doing that to family. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Every step toward 4A felt like reclaiming more than just a seat. When I reached the business class cabin, the flight attendant was waiting with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Parker. Can I get you some champagne before we depart? Yes, I said, settling into my rightful place by the window. Yes, you can. The flute was cool in my hand, the bubbles catching the overhead light. Outside, through the oval window, I saw the officers still speaking to Tessa and Eric at the gate, their luggage sitting to the side like unclaimed evidence. The engines hummed softly, the door closed, and I took a slow sip, savoring the first real moment of peace that day. From my window seat in 4A, I watched the scene unfold beyond the glass like a slow-moving play. Tessa stood with her arms crossed, her mouth moving quickly in short, sharp bursts, the way she did when she thought she could talk her way out of trouble. Eric was beside her, rubbing the back of his neck, his gaze darting between the officers and the gate counter, as though searching for an escape hatch. The officers stayed calm, but their body language told me everything. They weren't listening to excuses. One officer was taking notes, while the other kept their luggage by his side, hands resting on the handle, as if guarding evidence. Inside the cabin, the hum of quiet conversation had shifted tone. It was no longer polite chit-chat. It was a low buzz, the kind that comes when a group of strangers realizes they've all just witnessed the same drama and can't help dissecting it. That woman in the cashmere wrap took her seat, can you believe it? Family, too. Unreal. I heard it was fraud, like actual fraud. The businessman across the aisle leaned toward his seatmate, phone still in hand. I got most of it on video, he said, his voice low, but carrying just enough for nearby ears to perk up. I sat back, letting their words roll past me like a warm current. Every whisper was another stitch, sealing Tessa's reputation tighter to this moment. The flight attendant returned, topping off my champagne without asking. We'll be departing shortly, Miss Parker. They've been offloaded from the passenger manifest. Offloaded. The word had such a clean, final sound. I liked it. Outside, the gate agent was now speaking to the officers, gesturing towards the plane before handing over a small stack of papers. Boarding passes, no doubt. I wondered if Tessa realized how quickly digital records traveled, how easily her little stunt this morning had been traced back to her fingers at that kiosk. She turned suddenly, her eyes scanning the row of windows until they found me. Even through the glass, I could read the question in her face. How could you? I held her gaze for a beat, then lifted my champagne in a small, deliberate toast before turning back to my book. No theatrics, no words, just the quiet acknowledgement that she'd lost. Minutes later, the jet bridge pulled back, the engines deepened their growl, and the seatbelt sign chimed on. As the plane eased away from the gate, I caught one last glimpse of them standing in the terminal, two figures suddenly much smaller than they'd been in their own minds that morning. When the wheels left the ground, I felt more than just the lift of takeoff. It was the weight of weeks, maybe years, of letting small slights pass unchallenged, finally gone. Somewhere over the Aegean, I dozed lightly, waking to the soft clink of cutlery as the flight attendants served lunch. I imagined Tessa and Eric in the terminal below, trying to rebook on a later flight, their names already red-flagged in the airline's system. And I imagined something else. Word of what happened reaching Santorini before they did. Weddings are fertile ground for gossip, and our family had always been fertile soil. By the time they arrived, it wouldn't just be a story, it would be the story. I smiled faintly to myself. Sometimes, you don't have to raise your voice to make yourself heard. You just have to let the truth walk ahead of you into the room. By the time the wheels touched down in Athens, I'd had a full night's sleep, 2 hot meals, and enough legroom to stretch without bumping anyone. My connection to Santorini was smooth, the short flight filled with the scent of strong coffee and the faint perfume of a bride sitting 2 rows ahead. Even in transit, the island seemed to wrap me in warmth. The moment I stepped off the plane, the sunlight hit me sharp, golden, and so different from the muted light of the departure terminal. My luggage came through quickly, and the driver sent by Leela's fiancé was waiting with a neatly lettered sign. "Miss Parker," he greeted warmly, taking my bag and leading me to a sleek car. The ride along the cliffside roads was a ribbon of blue and white cobalt sea, stretching forever. Whitewashed houses clinging to the hillsides, bursts of bougainvillea spilling over walls. For a moment, I almost forgot the sour start to my trip. Almost. When we pulled up to the boutique hotel where the wedding party was staying, the air seemed to hum with chatter. Guests lingered on the terrace, wine glasses in hand, their faces turning toward me as I stepped out. A few smiled, others whispered behind raised fingers. Inside the lobby, Lila spotted me first. "Aunt Lorraine!" She hurried over, her arms open. "You're here. I heard about... Well, let's just say you've already made quite the entrance." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my voice light. "Oh? And what exactly have you heard?" Her smile was a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "Word travels fast here. Someone posted a video in the family group chat before we even had breakfast. Tessa and Eric. Airport police. Seat theft? People are still talking about it on the terrace." I sighed, shaking my head. I didn't plan for any of that, Lila. But I wasn't going to let someone walk over me either. She squeezed my hand. "Good. You shouldn't." As we spoke, the glass doors opened behind us, and the low murmur of voices fell to a hush. I turned just enough to see them. Tessa, her hair frizzed from the long journey, eyes darting around the room. Eric trailed behind her, pulling their luggage with jerky movements. They didn't see me at first. They were too busy scanning the guests and realizing that nearly every gaze that met theirs was cool, curious, or quietly judging. No warm embraces, no calls of welcome. Just the kind of silence that carries weight. Tessa's smile faltered as she caught snippets of conversation. "Can you believe? Family, police at the gate. Stole her seat." Eric's jaw tightened. He gave a small nod in my direction, but Tessa kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, moving quickly toward the reception desk. Lila leaned closer to me, her voice low. "You could cut the tension with a knife." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had arrived before them, and it was already seated comfortably among the guests. The welcome dinner was set on the hotel's upper terrace, a long table draped in white linen, lined with flickering candles and small vases of wildflowers. The Aegean stretched beyond us, silver in the moonlight, and the sound of waves floated up from far below. It should have been the kind of evening that wrapped you in warmth. But warmth was in short supply for Tessa. Guests were already seated when she and Eric arrived, their silhouettes framed by the terrace lights. She wore a pale silk dress, the kind that usually drew compliments, but tonight the fabric seemed to do her no favors. Heads turned toward her, but not with admiration, more with the kind of quiet appraisal people give when they've heard a story and want to see if the subject looks guilty. Lila's fiancé, Dimitri, stood to greet them, polite but reserved. "Welcome," he said, gesturing to two empty seats not at the center, where close family usually sat, but near the far end of the table, beside distant cousins they barely knew. Tessa hesitated. "Oh, I thought we'd be closer to Lila." Her voice had that brittle edge I recognized from years of forced pleasantries. Dimitri's smile didn't falter. "We wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to meet new people. You'll enjoy it." Then he turned away to refill a guest's wine glass. I sipped my water, watching the flush rise along her cheekbones as she took her seat. Eric muttered something to her, but she kept her eyes on the table, smoothing her napkin in short, jerky movements. The conversations flowed easily elsewhere. Travel stories, childhood memories, gentle teasing about Lila's pre-wedding nerves. Every so often, a guest would glance toward Tessa, lean to their neighbor, and whisper, One of the cousins at her table gestured vaguely toward me, and I caught a snatch of their voice. That's her, the one whose seat, before they lowered their tone again. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The social gravity was doing all the work for me. Midway through the meal, Dimitri's father stood to make a toast. He thanked everyone for traveling such distances, acknowledged the beauty of Santorini, and then almost casually added, "And let us also appreciate kindness and respect among family, even in the small things." His gaze swept the table, resting a fraction longer than necessary in Tessa's direction. The clink of glasses that followed was polite but restrained. I took a slow sip of wine, the rich red lingering on my tongue. By dessert, Tessa's voice had dwindled to near silence. Her attempts to join in the conversations at her table were met with polite nods and then a swift return to other topics. Even Eric seemed distant, answering her in short sentences as if the weight of the day had worn him down. When the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, the guests rose in small clusters, drifting toward the terrace rail to take photos. I passed by Tessa on my way to join Lila and Dimitri. She didn't meet my eyes, but I saw her fingers worrying the edge of her napkin, twisting it until the fabric curled. Some lessons, I thought, are best learned without a teacher saying a word. And I realized something. Standing up for yourself isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it's simply saying, "No, not this time." They thought they'd left me cramped and humiliated at the back of the plane. But in the end, I arrived in comfort, in dignity, and in a story that will outfly them both.